Come on in to Margaret McSweeney's Kitchen for Kitchen Chat, where every week you'll meet chefs, cookbook authors, foodies, gourmets, and just plain people who love to eat. And along with laughter, chat, recipes, and stories about food, you'll sometimes also hear words of inspiration, love, and hope. As Margaret always says, Kitchen Chat is food for the senses and food for the soul. So grab a cup of coffee, put your feet up on a comfy chair, and get ready to spend a little time with Margaret and her friends.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kitchen Chat. This is your host, Margaret McSweeney, and I am just so delighted that you are joining me here in my kitchen via webtalkradio.net. Welcome, and welcome especially to those new listeners. Each week we have different cookbook authors, chefs, and people tied in with the culinary world, and it's a way to have a culinary quest. So I'm so glad you're joining me on this journey, and get your notebooks out here for our first guest, who is Crescent Dragon Wagon, and she is such an accomplished person. It would take pages for me to go through her accomplishments, but we will be discussing her 50th book, which is Bean by Bean, a cookbook with 175 recipes about beans. And you are going to be amazed how much we can learn from the bean. And Crescent will be helping us. So thank you so much for being on Kitchen Chat, Crescent, and welcome.
It is my pleasure, Margaret, and hello to all the people who are listening to you from their kitchens or offices or cars or wherever they are in their life.
Oh, well, this is just so delightful to have you on the air. And my goodness, you are a James Beard award-winning cookbook author, and what an accomplishment. Congratulations on that.
I was so sure that I wasn't going to win that award that when I came to the award ceremony and had my plan of, unpack, work out, nap, bathe, dress, get up, that when I unpacked, I discovered I had forgotten my skirt. So I had to go out and buy a skirt. So nobody could have been more surprised than me that I won that award, but I was, of course, thrilled to win it. That was for my book, Passionate Vegetarian, which came before Bean by Bean.
Yes, and I look forward to reading that too and purchasing it because both of my daughters are vegetarians. So I am literally gobbling up your books, Crescent, and I can't wait for the listeners to learn about beans. Now, one passage just touched my heart when I read it in your acknowledgement page, and that is this: may all of us, like beans, continue to nourish each other as we are nourishing the world around us in every phase, bit by bit, bite by bite, bean by bean. There are a lot of life lessons, it seems like, from this little bean.
Well, I believe that when you write about food, whether it's an ingredient or a dish, if you look closely enough, you really do write about life as a whole, and you can see it in something as tiny as a bean. And you look at that little dry bean in your palm, whether it's a pinto bean or a black bean, and it doesn't seem very promising. And yet, if you planted it in the soil, it would become a bean plant. If you rinsed it and soaked it and rinsed it off every day, it would become a bean sprout. If you soaked it in boiling water and then drained it and then cooked it, it would become a cooked bean, which then would be the canvas on which you would paint with your sautéed onions and carrots and garlic and celery and cumin seeds, chili, which way you wanted to go with it. And so it's this little package of potentiality. And that quote that you like about, nourishing ourselves and each other's, one of the things that I just love about beans is they are beans, meaning every plant in the legume family. So beans includes peas, it includes peanuts, it includes all those relatives. They are the only category of plants which actually enrich the soil as they grow. They don't deplete it. They actually they're self-fertilizing. They add nitrogen to the soil. So in saying that, yeah, I hope that as we grow, we nourish our surroundings as well. So I do see them both metaphorically and very, very literally. In fact, I have black bean soup on the stove tonight. My Elsie's Cuban black bean soup from the book. I have company coming over, and we're going to eat that and tackle cleaning out my mother's attic. Close friends company.
Oh, this is just so much fun. I can't wait to talk about some of these 175 recipes in your new book, Bean by Bean. And I also wanted to let the listeners know that you share such wonderful culinary insight and life insight in two of your blogs. One is deepfeast.com, DEEP, feast, FEAST.com, and also Nothing is Wasted on the Writer. And you can Google that, listeners, to find a link to that. But it was so interesting in your one of your latest posts on deepfeast.com was grateful for garlic. So that's going to be a fun thing to read about, because it seems like a nice pairing with beans and garlic. But before we jump into the spices and the wonderful accoutrements of cooking a bean, I just wanted to kind of get some bean basics. And I love the way your book just walks the reader through different bean basics, including, that often funny thing to talk about, and that is the unless you were so cute in phrasing it as that explosive and musical quality of the bean.
Well, on the practical side, this very simple way to say it is that if you soak beans in a great deal of water and then you pour off the straining water, the more water you use to soak the beans, the less flatulating they will be. And that is because beans, they've got a ton of good things for you in them. They've got fiber, they've got vitamins, they've got protein. They're unbelievably proteinaceous. They're the most protein-packed food stuff in the vegetable world. But they also have these pesky little components called oligosaccharides, which are a kind of sugar that human beings can't digest. So what happens when we eat a bean is they ferment in our stomach, and that causes gas. And the oligosaccharides are water-soluble, so soaking helps. Also, some beans, like the smaller beans, like lentils and split peas, the more quick-cooking beans, black-eyed peas, they have fewer oligosaccharides than the slower-cooking, larger beans. But another thing is how often you eat them. If you eat a little bean a lot, or a lot of beans a lot, as I do, you're not going to have much problem. But if you don't eat beans very much at all, and then you go to a barbecue or something, and the baked beans are just beyond good, and you have 3 portions of it, you're going to have a problem.
Now, do all beans cause this effect, such as edamame? Do you see the soybeans?
No, with fresh green beans, definitely not. Fresh edamame, no. Okay. Bean sprouts, no. It's only the mature dry bean that has the oligosaccharides.
Okay, and that includes anything that's canned as well? Or does it have to be fresh?
Well, okay. A fresh bean would be like a green bean. Okay. The whole terminology at first, it's very easy to get confused. Yes. Because a green bean is a fresh bean. Okay. But as you know, if you go to farmers markets, a green bean can not only be green, it could be yellow.
Right.
Or it could be speckled. Or there are these wonderful green beans that are purple. Wow. And you boil them, and then they turn green.
Oh, wow.
So it's a very psychedelic thing, really. And I have a little adopted niece who loves to cook with me. Oh. And one of the fun things to do, we pull up her stool so she can stand on it. And I have it's a white enamel pot, so you can see the colors really clearly. And we bring a pot of water to the boil, and we take a handful of these purple beans, and we drop them in the water, and we stand there and watch as they turn from purple to green. Very exciting.
That
and then the
is. Oh.
and then the further Legu magic is you take out the cooked, formerly purple, now green beans, and then there's the cooking water, and the cooking water has a little tinge of green to it, as happens when you. But then I say, okay, Zoe, stand here and watch. And honest to God, that green bean cooking water, if it's the purple beans, then turns turquoise.
No, that is
honestly, it does.
Amazing.
And it's, and that's, when you get close to something, whether it's a bean or, a human being, the closer you get, the more you discover and the more interesting it is. I don't know how anybody can be bored in life. It's so interesting. But
exactly. And I never realized until you wrote this book, and I've been gobbling up the pages, just how prolific a bean is and just the wonderful merits and discoveries about beans. So I'm just so thrilled that you are joining us on this culinary quest with beans. Now, back to that purple bean. Is there a name for that bean, and is that featured in the book too?
Well, any green bean recipe that you make. Another thing let's touch on is the interchangeability of beans.
Oh, okay.
Any fresh green bean, it doesn't matter if it's green or yellow or purple.
Oh, okay.
You would basically cook them the same range of ways. They'll have a little difference in flavor and texture. There are a million varieties of fresh beans and dried beans. I think one of the purple varieties is called Purple Queen. You can go to a seed catalog. I may even have a list of all the varieties in here. I know I've got it of all the dried ones. But, that's just a variety like you would get in a seed packet. And I would add that at this moment, I just looked up purple in the index, and it's not under that, but I think it's there somewhere. But even if you just Google seeds purple beans, you'll find some of the variety names for those of your listeners who are gardeners, and the more gardeners, the merrier. Yeah. And of course, they'll also find them at farmers markets. And but you cook all green beans, all fresh green beans interchangeably. Similarly, although there are thousands, literally thousands of kind of dried beans, they too are somewhat interchangeable. They do have distinctive textures and flavors, but they are more alike than different. So this lovely black bean soup that I have simmering on the stove, I could make the same soup with black-eyed peas, and it would taste different, but it would taste good, and it would work the same. So don't get overwhelmed by bean varieties. Don't get overwhelmed by, oh my goodness, there's mortgage lifter beans, and there's yellow-eyed soldier beans, and there's Mother Sallard's beans, and you could take one good bean soup recipe and do it every day for a year with a different bean, and you would eat well, and it would be different but similar.
Exactly, and I never realized there were so many varieties of beans, and I did not realize that cranberry is essentially a bean? Is that the same?
Not a cranberry fruit.
Okay.
But there's a type of bean that's called a cranberry bean.
Okay.
That's its name. And it's also it's a very popular bean in Italy, and in Italian they refer to it as a borlati bean, and it's like a red mottled bean, but it's no biological relationship to the cranberries that go in bogs. Grow in bogs.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But it has that name. I mean, they have wild names for those beans.
Yes.
There's a bean, and I grew this in my garden this year, a bean called rattlesnake bean. No relation to rattlesnake.
Oh, good.
But, the pods are they're kind of a dark green. Those ones are kind of yellow, mottled with a reddish kind of marbling, and I suppose somebody decided they look like a rattlesnake, or either that, or as they curl around the bean pole, with their little tendrils, I suppose you could say. But then every bean does that. But if somebody named it rattlesnake bean, and in the days when I had a restaurant, we always would make a soup the day after Thanksgiving that was a turkey, wild rice, and rattlesnake bean soup. And, it could have been black-eyed peas or kidney beans or some other beans, but not only were the rattlesnake beans particularly good in that soup, just the name of it really intrigued our guests.
Exactly.
And they were always very interested to taste it. And that was a good soup, and that soup is in there too.
That's great. That's a fun name for that indeed, and a dish that your guests will always remember. I actually grew up in the South, and it was a real tradition for black-eyed peas to be served for New Year's, like as a good luck type of thing.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if there are other traditions associated with beans for celebration.
Well, now let me also tell you about the lucky beans, the black-eyed peas. That's actually an ancient thing, and goes back to the early Greeks and Romans. And each spot on the bean was supposed to indicate a coin. So if you ate a lot of black-eyed peas on the New Year's Day, or a speckled bean, of course, then they had different varieties of beans there. They in those days, America, was not occupied by Europeans yet, and so there was no trade. So most of the beans they had in Greek and Roman times came from the Middle East, but there were spotted beans, and so you ate a lot of them, or you ate a lot of lentils on the first day of the year, because each represented a coin. So you would get wealth in the coming year.
And so that has trickled into that same tradition into the Southeast. I grew up in Alabama, and we always had black-eyed peas.
I eat my Hoppin' John every New Year's Day without fail. And of course, the perfect thing to go with black-eyed peas, and indeed many bean recipes, is cornbread, and that has another good luck tradition. Because foods that are round are supposed to be good to eat at the New Year, because the year is a circle and makes a round. And in the Chinese tradition, of course, we just are towards the end as we're doing this discussion. We're at the end of a couple of weeks of the Chinese New Year, and this is the year of the dragon, so it's my year, and I'm very, very tickled about that. But at the Chinese New Year, lots of yellow and gold and orange foods are supposed to bring good luck, again, because gold is gold, money, but also round foods. So cornbread is such a good luck food because it's golden and round, and it happens to go great with black-eyed peas. And, even if the black-eyed peas and the cornbread doesn't bring you wealth in the following year, you have begun the year well-nourished with delicious food.
Yes,
so that's pretty lucky in and of itself.
That is true. And beans are truly a source of good nourishment. I was so struck by the statistic you provided that between 6 and 11% of a cooked bean's weight is protein. It's the single most concentrated source of plant-based protein in the world. With beans.
Which means, there are so many reasons to fall in love with beans, and I'm certainly not just saying that because I wrote a book about them. It's more the other way around. Because I was in love with them, I wrote a book about them. But, one is, they're this incredible source of protein, affordable at a time when almost everybody has to watch how much they spend.
Yes.
And yet, even though they're less expensive, they are such good nutrition, not only because of what they contain, but because of what they don't contain. If you get protein from, cattle, from beef or chicken, you have to be fairly attentive to how they were raised if you want to be sure that you're not getting incidental things that you might not want to eat, like antibiotics. Because of the current animal husbandry practices, animals are, so often raised in cramped and crowded conditions that they're prone to illnesses. So farmers who raise them in those circumstances prevent the diseases by adding antibiotics to feed for the animals, and that in turn gets into our food system and into our bodies, and then when you need an antibiotic, you're more resistant to it because you've been taking it in food.
Right.
And
whereas the bean
that's just one example.
Yeah.
And so by eating, more plant-based and plant-centered meals, not only do you get a lot of pluses, you don't get a lot of minuses, like that one I just mentioned.
Exactly.
And besides, they're tasty. I mean, none of that would mean anything if it wasn't really good and satisfying. Healthy is fine, but it has to give you pleasure to eat it.
And you have highlighted some delicious dishes for beans with 175 recipes in your Bean by Bean cookbook. And it's almost like, how would I say this? It's an adventure around the world in terms that you take us on, and because the bean is international. And what I found so interesting too, Crescent, is how that you mentioned that beans in ancient Rome, they were so esteemed, with legumes in general, that the 4 leading families took their names from them. The Lentulus for lentil, Piso for pea, Cicero, and we have a Cicero, Illinois, for chickpeas. I didn't realize that was that. And Fabius for fava.
Fava beans.
Yes, so there truly is such an international appetite for beans. And I love how you take us on a culinary journey around the world with this cookbook, because you feature one thing that intrigued me so much, the Kerala style.
Kerala.
Okay, and pardon my pronunciation. It's the South Indian.
Oh yes,
one.
yes. Now,
yes.
See, in the soup chapter, I actually consciously did it as around the world. It's not the very first chapter. First chapter is called Hummus Where the Heart Is, which is, appetizers and starters. But then when I got to soups, I mean, soups are such a natural for beans because beans like to cook slowly in a lot of water. So it's a very natural progression to soup. And although I knew I was going to have recipes throughout the world, from around the world throughout the book, I decided that in the soup section, I'm especially fond of soups. Oh. And I really did it I started in the Middle East. Yeah. And then we worked across to North Africa, Morocco, then down through Central Africa, then over to India, Asia. Then we came around to the West, and we have North and South America. And so I really did make that one. And there's a little section on each country. Yeah. And this is only in the soup chapter where you get sort of introduced to the beans and the styles of each of those cooking. And then throughout the book, of course, there are recipes from all over the place, but hopefully, I mean, I don't know how many people sit down and read a cookbook cover to cover, but if they read the soup chapter, they would also find out a lot about, bean varieties and how certain flavor combinations got used somewhere, such as in Kerala, which is a state in South India, and it is a place that I've spent a lot of time in my youth. And Kerala means land of the coconut palms. Oh, and it's a very distinctive style. People in America think Indian cooking is one thing, and they think it's kind of what they had at their local Indian restaurant. But India, every state has a markedly different cuisine, sometimes a different language, different style of dress. Right. And so South Indian is completely different than North Indian. North Indian uses a lot of butter, clarified butter or ghee as the fat. In South India, they use much more coconut oil, and it gives a completely different flavor to everything. South Indian is hotter, little hotter. It's sort of lighter, less fat. It's totally different from North. And I like North too, but I do have a special fondness for Kerala cuisine. And that Kerala-style dal, here you have a country that other than the new burgeoning upper middle class, most of the rural people are still pretty poor.
Oh.
And so their diet is based around three things: rice, or in some cases in North India, wheat to make flatbread,
Right.
chapatis, beans of different kinds, and vegetables. And yet it is such a varied cuisine. And how do they do it? Spices. And they don't use curry powder there. Every dish has its own spice mixture. And sometimes the spices are cooked in with the beans, or sometimes you might fry them separately and then add them, or sometimes you might fry them separately and then grind them, which we can do in a food processor or a mini chopper, maybe with a tomato if we want. But in India, in the rural India at least, they do it with a mortar and pestle.
Yes.
And then you add ginger and garlic. And so suddenly out of these three very basic, seemingly limited foodstuffs, vegetables, rice, beans, you have meals that are so different from one another, meal to meal. It's a phenomenal. It's like they're magicians. They pull it out of the hat every time. You cannot believe that they make these same basic ingredients so different, meal to meal.
And it's so interesting, too, in reading this chapter, and listeners, it's fabulous, in the soups section, going through the different countries and regions and continents and learning about their local bean dishes, where you talk about the word dal, D-A-H-L, which refers to both the legumes, the beans themselves, and also the unique dish made with them. And what you're talking about, it sounds so appetizing, in that you really can have variations on this presentation of a bean just by the spices and accoutrements you add to the creation. And just in general, just to take a step back, what are the spices and additions that you most recommend in terms of when you cook a bean? I mean, what should you really have on hand in general and in your pantry?
Well, of course, a lot depends on your taste and on, one of the great luxuries of knowing how to cook is if you're in the mood for something, you can go rustle around and get it. So beans, if you like beans, if you like Mexican, Southwestern kinds of food, you'll want to have cumin seeds on hand.
Okay.
Both, probably you'll want chili powder, which is CHILI powder on hand, and that's a blend of spices, as well as chili powder, which is CHILE, which would be a ground single kind of a chili pepper as opposed to that spice blend.
Okay.
You would maybe want bay leaves, oregano, and of course, onions and garlic.
Right.
And, again, going Mexican, depending how interested in this you were, you go to almost any supermarket and you can find that stand-up aisle with the cellophane bags of various kinds of chilies. Dried pasilla chilies or ancho chilies are absolutely wonderful. Anchos are dried fresh poblano peppers, and they're a little hot, a little sweet, and you throw one in while you're cooking your beans, and so that's just Mexican. Those would be flavors you would want Mexican.
Okay, for the Mexican. Okay.
And if you were doing Indian food,
yes,
you would use probably all of those except chili powder, but you'd add coriander seeds. Now, coriander seeds, for some reason, the same plant that we call cilantro, when we use its leaf, we call it coriander when we use its seeds, but it's the same thing.
Oh, I didn't realize
that. And some coriander goes into Mexican cooking as well, and South American, but a lot in Indian food. Along with your onions and garlic, you're going to want to add some wonderful fresh ginger.
Oh, so ginger.
And turmeric is that bright yellow spice that gives that color to so many Indian dishes. I am a big devotee of black mustard seeds or brown mustard seeds. They're little tiny seeds, not the ones that you think of like when you think of Dijon mustard. They're little
Right.
tiny seeds.
Huh.
So they would go into Indian food. And then there are many, many, many other ones that you might use occasionally. You probably would not use curry powder because it doesn't really exist in India. It's when the British colonized India and they said, oh, let's make it easy. We'll just combine everything into one. But then you lose the subtlety of all the thousands of different ways. Now, if you were making beans American style,
Yes.
you would probably want oil or bacon fat. I'm a vegetarian, but
Yes.
many people are not. And to many, it's interesting. To some people, the idea of a pot of beans without a ham hock in it is just unthinkable.
Right.
And then to some people, the idea of a pot of beans with a ham hock is unthinkable.
Exactly.
But,
That's
you know,
taste, right?
I kind of believe that the table is big enough for everybody. So
Yes.
I tried to make it so no matter what you eat or don't eat, you could find plenty that would make you happy in this.
Yes.
So if you were cooking beans American style, if you were so inclined, you know, pork is usually the meat that is eaten with beans, either as salt pork or bacon or ham hock. So you might use that. If you didn't use that, you would use a vegetable oil. Olive oil is not exactly American, although there are some California olive oils now. But you'd use some kind of oil. And again, you'd use onions, carrots, celery, maybe some garlic, lots of vegetables with it. You might add a bay leaf. You might add some herbs. You might add some chopped parsley at the end. Of course, salt and pepper. All beans, of course, need salt. Salt really brings them to life. But you do not want to salt your beans until they're soft, because if you salt them beforehand, it makes it much harder for them to soften.
Wow.
So you want to salt towards the end of the cooking time.
Okay,
But
because
so American style, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, just a quick cooking question, because I always hear a little tip, throw some salt into a pot of water so it won't boil over. So you wouldn't do that in this.
And of course, if you were cooking noodles, you would want to salt the water.
Okay.
But with beans, don't salt it till the end.
Don't
and
salt
just keep an eye on it so it doesn't boil over.
Yeah, exactly. Okay,
you know,
that's
you just have to be with it a little bit. But, you know, I mean, basically when you're cooking beans, and of course you can do them in a crock pot as well.
Right,
But when you're cooking them, generally after you've soaked them and rinsed them and you put them in fresh water and you bring the pot of water to a boil and then you turn it down to a nice low simmer and leave it half covered and you forget about it for a couple of hours if you're cooking it on the stove.
Okay.
And if you're cooking it on the crock pot, you really forget about it because you know it's not going to burn or anything like that. And since I work at home and I live in Vermont now, where it's cold, it's lovely in the winter to have beans simmering because the steam sort of floats up the stairs and curls under the door, and you know it's warm and steamy and smells like dinner and
very comforting.
So you know, anyway, we could continue around the world, and I could keep giving you spices to have.
Right, and I just encourage the listeners to go to your bean book, Bean by Bean, for all of this fabulous information, and it's just great. And I think I'm going to challenge myself to take a culinary bean tour around the world this year, and I encourage the listeners too, and just follow Crescent Dragon Wagon's book, and as she takes you through each country and try a recipe a week, and introduce these exotic tastes to your table. Now, I have to ask, because you know a lot of us don't have the time to be starting with the beans. We just, we have to open that can in our pantry. Is this a major faux pas in the bean world, or can it work? Can it still work?
I have lots of recipes there for canned beans because everybody does run out of time. And again, towards the beginning of the chapters, in the basic part, the beans are very agreeable and they're fairly interchangeable. Now, a cooked chickpea from scratch is so much better than a canned one, but they take a while to cook, and they're great to have on hand as a quick food. Is there a price to pay? Yeah. It costs much more to buy a can of cooked beans than a pound of raw beans that you cook yourself.
Right.
And it does leave a larger footprint. You're using up resources. You're using the metal that goes into the can. You're using the energy that went into printing the label, the energy that went into transporting the can, and all of those things.
Yes.
So, but you will not burn in hell for using a can of beans. Or if you will, then I'm fried.
Oh, no.
because I have plenty of them in my pantry as well as all the other ones.
And thank you. That gives me a lot of comfort knowing that. And yes, listeners, please recycle. Remember to do that. And one final thing I have to make note of too is I love how part of the journey too includes Brazil and the feijoada, which I just adore because I actually lived in Brazil for 6 months, and it was such a tradition, a time-honored tradition where you share a meal on Saturdays with friends and family, and called feijoada or feijão, and where it's all inclusive with how do I say this delicately? A lot of black beans and spices, but also pig parts. And that was the first time I had dipped into a bowl and saw little pig feet in that. So it was, and a little pig snout. So.
My Brazilian friend, Rosilia, Rosalia, who runs Cafe Bossa Nova in Little Rock, says that when they do their feijoada, they like to put in every part of the pig but the squeal.
I love it.
But it was from Rosalia I also learned how to make a vegetarian feijoada.
Yes.
And I decided at some, it's hard to choose what goes in and goes out. I mean, that book could have been 3 times as long. It's very, very hard. But I decided not to put the meat one in, first of all, because there are so many, many, many different variations.
Yes.
Second of all, because it has been almost 3 decades since I've eaten meat, and although I'm comfortable doing meat recipes that I either made back when I did eat meat or that friends of mine do, I'm fine with that.
Right.
I just thought, no, they can get that elsewhere.
Yeah.
And, how many people that read this are actually going to go out and get a smoked pig's ear?
Right.
No, they'll get a Brazilian cookbook if they want to go there.
Exactly.
So I made this vegetarian feijoada.
Yes, I love the name you gave that.
It's really good. It's really good. And similarly, French cassoulet is another one. Cassoulet is, has the same place, sort of, that feijoada does. Everybody does it a little differently, and however they do it, however your mother did it, is the one and only right way to do it. And, if you ate feijoada in one part of Brazil by the coast, it's going to be really different than up in the mountains.
Exactly.
And the beans will be different, the meat they add, whether they add meat. Some places add pumpkin or, sweet potato. Very different. And similarly with cassoulet, all over France, cassoulet is very different, but any French man or woman will swear to you that theirs is the one and only real, dyed in the blood cassoulet. And so most, and cassoulet has a tremendous amount of animal parts in it. It has, clarified duck fat and like that. And if you want to do the classic cassoulet or feijoada and go crazy and make your own duck fat confit and take 2 days, there are excellent cookbooks that do that. It's a production. But, I challenge anybody to eat either my feijoada or my cassoulet and not kind of fall on the ground in a swoon of delight. I mean, they're really wonderful.
Well, I cannot wait to try that, and I cannot wait to try a lot of your recipes. This is a must-have, listeners, for all seasons, and a journey, as I said, a culinary quest around the world for beans. And I am just so appreciative, Crescent, for your sharing today with us about beans and the lessons and the great flavor that they add to life for everyone. And I have learned so much in the process. I'm so appreciative, and I will never look at a little bean the same way again. And
well,
also,
good.
Yes, and also I think you bring it home, per se, in terms of reminding us that, the meals are to be shared and enjoyed by all, and that we had spoken previously how each bite you take, you take the time to remember the person that prepared the food and harvested and shipped. I just think that's a wonderful way to approach food with friends and family. And you also shared some true words of comfort for those who might be eating dinner alone tonight. What were the wonderful words that you shared?
Well, before we were recording, Margaret, as you know, and I think I can tell your readers, you said, "Oh, be sure to say that when we're recording," and it really is true, and it's something I deeply believe, which is that no one ever does really eat alone. You might eat by yourself, but when you think of all the hands that went into making, I mean, even if you're, I hate to say it because I don't do this, but even if you're microwaving a frozen dinner, some people somewhere put that food together and put it into the containers and wrapped it and froze it. And, if that microwave dinner has tomato sauce in it, well, for generation after generation or before a generation, people were saving their tomato seeds and planting tomatoes and harvesting them and cooking them down into sauce. Yeah. And, when we bite food, we bite tradition and past and present, and we participate in a long line of being creatures who live on this particular planet where, the unwritten contract is you eat while you're here, and then when you die, your physical body returns to the soil, and presumably other things eat it. People don't like to think about that, but I think it's kind of comforting to think about myself.
And it comes back to the bean where you were saying bit by bit, bite by bite, it just leaves the ground more nourished, and how we as people living here should leave a positive mark on life. And I just so appreciate this food for the senses and food for the soul that you have provided us here on Kitchen Chat on Web Talk Radio today. Crescent Dragon Wagon, thank you so much. And listeners, please visit her website. It's dragonwagon.com, and also her blogs, which deepfeast.com, and Google Nothing is Wasted on the Writer, where you'll see her wonderful thoughts on life and great recipes. And definitely get Bean by Bean a cookbook. Crescent Dragon Wagon has truly provided a great perspective on this little bean that has such a big impact. So thank you so much again, Crescent, for being on Kitchen Chat. This has been so much fun. And listeners, I encourage you, please, to stay in touch and send along what your favorite bean is. I'd love to feature that on the website. Yes.
And I'll check it out on the website too and see what you have to say. One thing about when you write a book about a subject you're in love with is, although the book ends, your learning and adventure with it does not. And you're always learning from readers and from cooks and from gardeners and from life itself. Yes. And so I look forward to continuing on that bean journey with you, Margaret, and with any of your listeners.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Crescent. And this has just been a delight. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. And please remember, as you sit at your table this evening or you're eating on the run in the car, just take the time and savor the day.
Thank you for joining us today. If you're interested in Margaret's books, A Mother's Heart Knows, Pearl Girls Encountering Grit, Experiencing Grace, and Go Back and Be Happy, please just click on the covers on the webtalkradio.net page in front of you. Margaret would love to connect with you and hear from you, so join her on Twitter, Facebook, her blog, or click on this website to leave a note and share a recipe. Thank you again, and we'll see you here again for a new show next week.